Today we're down in the Bay of Plenty and the day started in absolute carnage. On the way out we spotted some meatballs working on the surface early in the morning, and we're trying to untangle float lines, jump over the side, swim towards them. There's big sharks, tuna everywhere, and we eventually get close to the first meatball for the day. You can see here the skippies are actually quite placid, just moving around, slowly feeding on this meatball. We thought, man, this is pretty exciting to start the day. My dive buddy here, Sophie, is doing her best to try and track or intercept one of these fish, which sometimes can be easier said than done. After a few missed shots and mistimed shots, she actually managed to get the new woman's record. Here was an awesome experience. As you see here, the meatballs actually would move down. When the tuna weren't pushing it up, it'd start moving down deep. And you see the gannets here, they're diving to maybe 15 meters feeding on these meatballs. It was awesome. You watch them, they look at me on their way up. Incredible divers to be able to hit the water and swim down to, I would have said at least 15 meters down there. The tuna would come back in and they'd drive the meatball back towards the surface, feeding on it, mainly skippies with the odd albacore. It was quite interesting because the tuna would come and they'd start feeding on the meatball, then they'd move off again, and the meatball would just stay stationary like this, and then it would slowly move its way back deep. And then we started to realise that it started getting quieter and quieter, so we must have maybe came right at the tail end of the feeding. As I mentioned, there was the odd albacore amongst all the skippies here, and here my other dive buddy John takes a long shot and misses it. So with that we decided we'd head away from these and we'd go to the reef. Visibility was just absolutely incredible. This was about as close as you get to diving in the tropics. Swimming out off the edge here into some deeper water, you see there's just masses and masses of blue mau. And I make my first dive down through them, and it looks kind of funny. It looks like it's almost gloomy on the bottom, but then I realise that it's just the sand. We're in maybe 26, 27 meters of water here, and the sand looks like it's right there. Some of the best visibility I think I've seen in New Zealand. This might be a norm for the tropical islands, but in New Zealand we often have dirty water, especially if you descend down sort of past 25 meters. You don't often get really nice blue water down there. Where on this day it was absolutely inky blue water. These kind of dives are actually quite funny because you'd expect you'd go and you'd shoot a whole heap of fish. There's so many fish around, but you spend most of the day really just taking in the sights. The water was so crystal clear, it was just lovely diving out here and watching all the school and bait fish. The odd kingfish makes a pass through the blue mau, but there's not a huge amount happening. All these blue mau will be resident fish here. Often the times when the water's really clear like this, fish will tend to keep their distance, especially big fish. So it doesn't necessarily make for great spearing, just an enjoyable time. On my second dive I head further along the edge here and still this is incredible visibility. Here in about 30 meters of water and you look how clear it is towards the bottom. You can see a long way along the bottom there and you'll see anything coming in from a long way away. But also the downside to this is the fish see you from a long way away, so they don't need to approach so close. I'm making my way to the bottom here as if there are any big fish in the area, they're probably more likely to approach me on the bottom here than they are right up in the middle of the water column. The thing here is any big fish will see me from at least 20 meters away. So I got to try and gain their curiosity. Incredible scenes here, even though not a big schooler kingfish, just a beautiful sight in this lovely clear water. You see, the kingfish aren't that interested in coming too close, but there's nothing really big there. They're all sort of small to medium size. I've dived this area before, but never have I seen it this clear before. It was quite spectacular. And on inspection above, there's actually a mob of sparrows that are drifting down the same line, and they're coming and drifting over the top of me. They're running a flasher down at about 10-15 meters. But often what I find in these sort of scenarios, especially in this really clear water, if you're trying to get onto a really big kingfish, you need to try and get down towards their level, or even better if you get down below them, as they're not going to be as curious in this lovely blue water. I do my best to sort of stay out of their way, so I head back along the reef edge here and figured we've got to shoot something for dinner. There's loads and loads of blue mau-mau, pink mau-mau, trevally coming past, lots of kingfish. Having a quick look around, but I decided we might as well shoot one of these pink mau-mau. Not to mention, when you're doing these dives, I'm using a 130 on this day, as you never know what you might see with this lovely blue water. And it does pay, if you're using a gun you don't always use, especially a longer gun, to do some shooting before you encounter something good. As the last thing I want is to miss a really big kingfish or a big pelagic fish, all because I haven't been practicing with my longer gun. We'd all shot a few pink mau-mau here and really enjoyed the sight, so we moved on to another spot, and a little bit shallower. And there was even more kingfish here, and bigger ones too. Here there was some sort of medium to starting to get quite big kingfish. These ones were a lot more friendly. But same, as I mentioned, often on these days, I don't really tend to feel the need to shoot too much, as you're always hoping, sort of waiting for something spectacular. Once again, you never get sick of looking at schools of kingfish in this nice clear water. There's one quite big one in the middle there. At this point, we'd actually done quite a bit of diving. We'd seen all those meatballs in the morning, headed to the reef and done a bit of diving. So we thought we might as well make our way back and see what we could find on the way back in. And we hit the absolute jackpot. This is a dream that we always hope of seeing coming back from a dive. I'd actually already been in the water. I quickly jumped in the water as we raced over to it to get there before the other boats. And on inspection, it was quite scary. So I hopped out of the water and did what every brave guy does. Convinced my female dive buddy to get in the water and protect me. So here we're jumping in for our second go. We're all ready to rock. And over the side you can see the absolute carnage. What an incredible sight to see. Lots and lots of really big sharks. Lots of tuna and massive meatballs. I'm no shark expert, but these are not your normal bronze whalers. I'm pretty sure they're dusky whalers because they tend to be way too big to be bronze whalers. It's quite hard to tell, but these are really, really big sharks. And they spent the next few hours hanging around with us. With all the commotion and you get all excited from all the shark action, I'm not really focusing too much, I'm just trying to take it in, and then all of a sudden I spot this yellowfin tuna come through the meatball. And if you see in the middle of the screen here, you might have to watch it a couple of times, but you'll see it there. And like any good dive buddy, I decided I was going to delegate the camera to Sophie, my dive buddy, and I was going to try and get stuck into these yellowfin. All my nerves went away with the sharks as the excitement took over. I have done this sort of stuff before a long time ago when I was younger. One thing we did figure out is you want to stay away from the meatball. The meatball's constantly trying to get close to you for shelter so it doesn't get attacked by these thousands of skippies that are flying up at it. So every time I'd move away from the meatball to try and allow all the fish to be comfortable again feeding. This is sometimes easier said than done when you've got floats and float lines in the water. Sophie was a little bit more worried about these really big sharks and decided that she looked quite interesting. Meanwhile, I'm not too worried. I'm busy trying to dive on the meatball and get into these yellowfin. While Sophie's actually filming all these sharks, schools of yellowfin started hitting the meatball, and I was doing my best to try and intercept them. You see here, I make a dive. I'm trying to stay away from the meatball, but I'm hoping that one of these yellowfin is going to come towards me. Another thing you've sort of found in the past is the yellowfin will come flying up and hit the meatball, and when they peel off, that's when they'll be going their slowest. And the funny thing with yellowfin and lots of other tuna is they're not that curious most of the time, so you're just trying to intercept their path. The meatball ends up splitting into two as the gannets are attacking one, the skippies are attacking the other. It was really exciting stuff. Not to mention all the boats that are around us. I've got fishermen running over my float line. I've got other boats turning up with mates on them that are wanting to get in the water. If you ever come back in life, you do not want to come back as an anchovy. As I mentioned earlier, the meatball sometimes would try and escape. You see how it gets all distorted here, and it's trying to head deep to get away. These sharks were quite interesting because they were really placid. They never made any fast movements, so we weren't really worried for our own safety, but it was just quite exciting with how big they were. And you see here's one driving the meatball back to the surface. It doesn't seem to be too worried about eating it, just pushing the meatball back to the surface so the tuna and the sharks can just keep feeding on it. My dive buddies that were on another boat had turned up, and I encouraged them to try and get in the water, as this truly was an amazing sight. You look at here as the carnage of the skippies that are just annihilating this meatball. Unfortunately, after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, the yellowfin disappeared and it was just skippies and sharks. Although it does get hard to see sometimes as there's so much going on. But there was no shortage of action as we managed to see these massive sharks feeding on this meatball, which was very exciting. Believe it or not, this was actually not that uncommon of a sight maybe 15-20 years ago. Every year meatballs like this would turn up down in the Bay of Plenty with lots of sharks, tuna, yellowfin tuna, all sorts. But this is not something that tends to happen so often anymore. Hopefully that's going to change over the next few years, and maybe, just maybe, this might become a more common sight. One thing's for sure, we're going to be back very soon with some more footage and some more action down in the Bay of Plenty.